Hello everybody, it's vanburman here. Welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be talking about UserBenchmark, which I'm sure I can't be the only one, but I tend to use UserBenchmark quite a bit. And one of the key criticisms that's come out about it is in regards to the AMD Ryzen processors. So I guess the famous image at the moment is that of the 5950, pretty sure it's 5950X, trailing behind the 10900K in terms of its overall score. I can't remember exactly what the scores are, like 100, 102 and 104. But anyway, if you look at the individual scores, you'll find that the AMD chip outperforms the Intel chip, by a couple of percentage points in each of the areas in which UserBenchmark sort of does the scoring. So single core, 2 core, 4 core, 8 core, 16, I think, and then 64, or 32 and then 64. Either way, obviously. The Ryzen chip beats out the Intel chip all day long. I mean, I think there's been enough evidence to prove that, and they do so on UserBenchmark's own particular scoring system. Now, got a long sort of way around it, but there was some controversy a while ago with UserBenchmark, same sort of thing, and they came out and said that they had changed some of their scoring weighting on their parts, which sort of gave a little bit, ended up giving a disadvantage to Ryzen, and I think at the time that was maybe more applicable because a lot of people would go on there, or do generally go on there, to see how their components are doing for a gaming computer. And of course, if the Ryzen processors with more cores are outperforming the Intel processors with less cores but with better performance, then that would skew things the other way. And I think this is a bit of an overhang from that, and something that UserBenchmark do need to go and address for sure. I won't sit here and defend them for that by any stretch of the imagination. They've not taken into account the new release of the 5000 series, and yeah, basically that needs to be rectified. The two need to be switched around effectively. But yeah, I think if UserBenchmark got a way of doing it by release, I guess, I mean, because the thing is, I understand the reason for it in the first place. I just maybe think they should go back to the old weighting where it was overly favouring multi-cored chips effectively, as opposed to those with good, strong single-core performance. And now we know that through the improvements made in the Ryzen 5000 series that they are ahead of Intel in Intel's latest 10 series ones. So there's that to consider, and I think that that criticism that has been levelled against them is fair. And I think there is, to a point, maybe that, and people have deduced from it that that they are, Intel shills, I guess, or something like that, or that they don't like AMD, and they have come out and publicly said things about AMD fanboys. But it's I guess the way you really look at that is, or what they did say, which I won't repeat, but insert whichever company's fanboys here, because it is not purely exclusive to AMD at all. So there is that, and that is something that you can take away, and you have to use your own evaluation with it. But there's been a lot of further widespread criticism about UserBenchmark. In particular, the one that I saw most recently is Linus's one, saying that it's, I'm paraphrasing, saying that it's complete trash effectively and shouldn't be used as any sort of comparison. You actually have to have the hardware in order to test it and verify it. Now, I've probably tested, I don't know, not as many CPUs, to be fair, but probably maybe 10 or so CPUs and up to and above 30 GPUs at this point. And UserBenchmark has been one of the barometers that I've used in not only potentially buying a card, but also testing a card. And I have to say, generally speaking, it's stuff for especially older hardware holds up, the relative performance, holds up really well. And I think that generally as a tool to be used alongside other benchmarks and your own findings as well, it is really useful. It gives you a really good stack of where your card is compared to other cards. It gives you a good stack of where your card is compared to the exact same, model of card. And I think that I found that quite a few times, that where UserBenchmark has positioned it is where it's fitting on my chart. So that's not always the case. Some cards, especially if they're close, my one might be able to overclock particularly well, or in the case of the RX 480, like pretty much non-existently. So therefore it's, a pretty poor 480 compared to other people's. But, that sort of thing you can deduce and find out from the UserBenchmark. Look, it's not perfect. The way it does its benchmarks are too short. They definitely favour, the initial boosting of Intel. They favour the initial, the shorter runs on graphics cards. You can definitely overclock more, and you can definitely get a higher score by overclocking your graphics card on UserBenchmark than you can running any sort of in-game benchmark or running any game, because of how short the benchmarks are. Obviously, I believe they're all DX9 as well, so it doesn't take into account a lot of the different performances, by the architectural, the DX changes, and sort of where that fits in. One of the things they've tried to introduce is doing the FPS on different games, so people submit their FPS scores. That's open, obviously, to a bit more manipulation, I guess. And I think that, one of Linus's main criticisms was that it's user submitted stuff, so therefore it could be wrong, could be wholly inaccurate. The data is not good potentially. And from what I gather, UserBenchmark does tend to take out those outliers, and they do have a policy where they only take your first submitted run. So if I just benchmark my 760, I benchmark that. The first time I benchmark it, that's the score it takes. If it fits somewhere within what they're expecting, because obviously they've got a huge amount of scores now, then yeah, it'll be fine and it will register, and that will then affect the overall highest, medium, whatever in the sample. And then if I go and do it again, it will just compare me to that sample. So in many ways, that's probably a better way of doing it, because you don't get 50 submissions from me trying to overclock it to try and get as high a score as possible. You just get the first one, and then that then goes into everyone else's. So, and obviously the other side of it, I could equally submit one and then go, right, I'm going to downclock it as far as possible, and I'm just going to release 100 different benchmarks, submit 100 different benchmarks into UserBenchmark, and that's going to bring down the average score. But it won't, because it'll only take your first one, and that's one. So if you really, really were hell-bent on saying, right, I'm going to really reduce the score of this particular card, I'm guessing you could do it. But, especially with the sample sizes that they get, it's unlikely to do so. So I think my overall point is, I think Linus's criticism is unfair, and I think it is not considerate of the advantages that comes from a platform like UserBenchmark. You have to accept the fact that it's not accurate. It's not as good and concise as something like a 3D Mark, for example. Pure, well, not just graphics, but CPU as well, but one that is longer, takes use of different APIs as well, and lets you judge accordingly, by the APIs. PC Mark as well is pretty good for that sort of thing. That's more goes on a similar sort of vein as UserBenchmark, I guess. But UserBenchmark is quick, it's free, gives you a really good idea of where things stack, and I think there's not too many instances, unlike this big one that's come out because it's new hardware, high profile, that actually doesn't make sense. If you go through and look at the top 100 graphics cards, I don't know how many of those positions will surprise you, because maybe one or two might surprise me. I'll go, oh, I didn't realise that one was faster than that one. You know, and sometimes it's really close. It's on a knife edge. And yeah, that's all I'm saying. That I think there is, and people will still continue to use UserBenchmark. Don't think it matters what people like me come out and say, what people like Linus comes out and says, because people still use it, and it is a tool at your disposal. And like all of these ones, you take it with a pinch of salt. And if you want to tune your system, lots of ways to do it. UserBenchmark can be a good way of trying to find out a rough comparison. But, you know, naturally, you should be using things. I don't necessarily recommend Fairmark, which I know Linus is a big fan of, but, you know, like 3D Mark or Ada64 or other things. I don't know, can't think of any at the minute, but they're the ones I tend to use. But yeah, you know, well, I can say, well, you can use Fairmark, I guess. Just anything to stress the GPU. Sorry, I just have had bad experiences with Vanburman in the past, so maybe that's something for me rather than overall general point. But nevertheless, I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you take it for what it is as well. I'm not bashing on anyone or anything. You know, I am a user of UserBenchmark, and I think it's a worthwhile tool. Don't think it's always right, and it's not perfect. I think there's criticisms to be made for all of them. Quite frankly, maybe UserBenchmark gets the biggest flack because it doesn't help itself. That is for certain. And I do hope that they fix the issue with the Ryzen weighting. Wasn't a surprise to me. I already knew it was going to be that way because, you know, I'd heard the news previously about the changes to the metrics. But I guess it's just one of them, isn't it? I think as a slight criticism maybe to Linus, and a bit of mitigation as well, he is sort of forced to make sort of snap comments on things, especially when it comes to things like the WAN show, because, you know, it's something that if he's not interested in UserBenchmark, he wouldn't know about the stuff previously. He hasn't used it enough to know exactly, you know, how it works and the intricacies potentially. And I think, you know, that sometimes, and that does come back to bite him a few times as well. You know, he said stuff about Apple, he said stuff about the PlayStation 4 that he's had to then come back and retract or at least modify. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I think if you take him fully on his first reaction, you're unlikely to always get, you know, not necessarily the truth, but the full story, I guess. So, as with anything, you know, you take... the thing I always do is I take the worst opinion of something, the best opinion of something, and then usually, almost always, find that it lands somewhere in the middle. It's very rarely either of the two. So that's just advice for life, I think, though. Just to take things with a pinch of salt, always. Even if you want, especially, it's another thing, while I'm on it. No one's watched this far, so it doesn't matter. But especially if it's something you feel really passionate about. I mean, I don't know. I can't think of a good example because I don't particularly want to rile anybody up, but you think of something you really want to happen, or something you really dislike, sorry. There you go, like a gaming company, EA. Someone releases a report on EA that says they are doing this, that, and the other, and you're like, yes, great. They're bad people and they're being called out for doing bad things. Well, especially if it's early on, chances are that report has been, you know, dialed up to 11, and actually, you know, EA then come out and said, oh, we are sorry for what's happened, you know, this is what's happened, potentially, like, you know, we're sorry for this, that, and the other. And, you know, maybe the first report goes further, then likelihood is somewhere in the middle. That first report's gone too far, exaggerated, and likely EA hasn't or insert game or any company here hasn't apologised for everything it's been involved with. So, anyway, this is getting too long now. But I appreciate anyone that's watched the video, especially if you made it to this part. I appreciate it. And, well, I will see you all on the next one. Bye for now. And stay safe. And do a handstand. Bye.